A poverty-stricken nanny was dragged into the Boston federal courtroom, still wearing her gray work uniform, pink rubber gloves, meant for changing diapers, still on her trembling hands, accused of stealing a Boston $2 million heirloom diamond necklace belonging to the most powerful mafia family on the East Coast. No lawyer, no witnesses, no one standing in her corner. Facing her was Dominic Crane, the mafia boss who controlled all of New England, a man whose single nod could make anyone disappear forever. His steel-gray eyes looked straight through her, as if she were nothing but air. Completely unaware that she had been raising his 2 children alone for 7 years in a slum apartment, while a lupus disease slowly killed her day by day. The very moment she opened her mouth to say guilty to receive a 7-year sentence instead of 15, the courtroom doors burst open with a thunderous crash. 2 7-year-old children, a boy and a girl, identical as 2 drops of water, charged into the middle of the courtroom, vaulted over the security barrier, and climbed straight onto the defendant's bench. The boy clamped both small hands over his mother's mouth. The girl whipped around, pointed directly at the mafia boss, and screamed in a crystal-clear voice that shattered the silence. "If our mom goes to prison, then he has to go too. He abandoned us." Then she pulled from her dress pocket a crumpled old photograph, causing Dominic Crane's ice-cold face to turn pale for the first time in his life. Because that photo exposed a love he had buried 8 years ago at Boston Common, along with a blood connection he never knew existed. And sitting in the front row, his beautiful fiancée, the one who had orchestrated everything, began to tremble, because her web of lies was about to collapse right there in the courtroom. The courtroom fell into a deathly silence. Not a single breath could be heard, not a rustle of fabric, not a whisper. It was as if time itself had stopped, freezing every person in place like statues in a museum of shock and disbelief. Dominic Crane stood motionless, his steel-gray eyes locked onto the crumpled photograph, trembling in the little girl's outstretched hand. For the first time in over a decade, for the first time since he had buried his father and inherited an empire built on blood and shadows, those cold, calculating eyes lost their composure. A crack appeared in the glacier. His left hand, the hand that had signed death warrants without flinching, began to shake almost imperceptibly. Judge Morrison slammed his gavel against the wooden block once, twice, 3 times. The sharp cracks echoed through the chamber like gunshots, but no one flinched. No one even turned to look at him. "Order. I demand order in this courtroom." His voice cracked with a mixture of authority and utter confusion. He had presided over hundreds of cases, murders, trafficking, corporate fraud, but never in his 30-year career had he witnessed anything like this. Prosecutor Cross stumbled backward, his face drained of color. His carefully prepared case, his airtight evidence, his guaranteed conviction, all of it was crumbling before his eyes. He opened his mouth to object, to say something, anything, but no words came out. His hands fumbled uselessly with papers that suddenly meant nothing. "This is a scam." Victoria Ashford shot to her feet, her Hermes handbag clutched against her chest like a shield. Her platinum blonde hair, perfectly styled that morning, now seemed to bristle with barely contained hysteria. "She hired these children. This is all staged. Can't you see what she's doing?" Her shrill voice cut through the silence, but it only made things worse. The spectators in the gallery began to murmur, their eyes darting between the mafia boss, the accused nanny, and the 2 small warriors who had just stormed the gates of justice. Lucas kept his hands firmly pressed over his mother's mouth. Tears streamed down his dirt-smudged cheeks, carving clean tracks through the grime of a night spent hiding in the rain. But his eyes, those steel-gray eyes that mirrored his father's with haunting precision, burned with a determination that belied his 7 years. He would not let her speak. He would not let her sacrifice herself. Beside him, Emma stood like a tiny soldier facing an army of giants. Her faded floral dress was still damp from the storm. Her tangled hair fell across her face in wild strands. But she did not tremble. She did not shrink. She held that photograph aloft like a torch in the darkness, her chin raised in defiance against every powerful adult in the room. "I'm not lying," Emma said, her voice steady as stone. "And I'm not scared of any of you." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Dominic Crane began to move. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate, each step heavier than the last. Security guards reached for their weapons, then hesitated. Lawyers stepped aside. Even the judge fell silent, watching the most dangerous man in New England walk toward the defendant's bench, as if drawn by an invisible force. Dominic stopped in front of Emma. The little girl did not back away. She stared up at him with eyes that held no fear, only accusation, only truth. Slowly, carefully, as if handling a live grenade, Dominic reached out and took the photograph from her small fingers. Then he lifted his gaze, and for the first time in 8 years, Dominic Crane looked directly into Claire Bennett's eyes. The photograph was worn and creased, its edges softened by years of handling, years of being folded and unfolded, tucked away and taken out again in moments of desperate longing. Dominic stared at the image, and the courtroom around him dissolved into nothing. In the photograph, 2 people sat on a wooden bench in Boston Common. The autumn leaves blazed orange and gold behind them, a perfect October afternoon frozen in time. The man wore no suit, no tie, no armor of expensive fabric, just a simple white t-shirt and jeans, his dark hair slightly disheveled by the wind. He was laughing not the cold, calculated smirk that Dominic Crane had perfected over the years, but a real laugh. A laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes, a laugh that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. There was no scar running from his right eye to his cheekbone, no silver threads at his temples, no shadows lurking behind his gaze, just a 28-year-old man hopelessly in love, and beside him, tucked under his arm with her head resting against his shoulder, was Claire. Young Claire, beautiful Claire. Her chestnut hair danced in the breeze, catching the sunlight like strands of silk. Her pale green eyes sparkled with a hope that seemed infinite, a joy that knew no boundaries. She was smiling at the camera with the radiance of someone who believed in happy endings. The memories crashed over Dominic like a tidal wave. The scent of her lavender shampoo when he buried his face in her hair, the sound of her laughter echoing through their tiny apartment above the bakery on Newbury Street, the warmth of her body pressed against his on cold autumn nights, the way she whispered his name, not Dominic Crane, the heir to a criminal empire, but just Dominic, the man who made her coffee wrong every morning and kissed her forehead before she fell asleep. And the last night, that final night when his father's men found him, when they dragged him back to a world he had tried so desperately to escape, when he left nothing but an envelope of cash and a coward's note on her pillow. Dominic's hands trembled violently now. He looked at the children, really looked at them for the first time. Lucas, with his defiant stance and clenched jaw, had a small birthmark behind his left ear. The same birthmark Dominic saw every morning in the mirror. Emma, despite her fierce expression, had a smile that tilted slightly to one side when she wasn't guarding it. His mother's smile. His smile. The mathematics was simple, brutal, undeniable. 7 years old. 8 years since he vanished. Dominic's knees buckled. The most powerful man in New England. The man who had brought senators to their knees and made rivals disappear without a trace sank down until he was eye level with the 2 children who shared his blood. How? His voice came out as a broken whisper, stripped of all authority. How old are you? Emma's eyes narrowed. She did not soften. She did not yield. 7 years old, she answered, her voice sharp as a blade. And we don't need you. We never needed you. Mom raised us alone, and we were fine without you. The words struck Dominic like bullets to the chest. He lifted his head slowly. His steel gray eyes now swimming with something that looked terrifyingly like tears found Claire's face above him. Why? His voice shattered into fragments. Why didn't you tell me? Something inside Claire finally shattered. She reached up with trembling hands and gently pulled Lucas's small fingers away from her mouth. Her son resisted for a moment, his eyes pleading with her not to speak, not to give in. But Claire shook her head softly, cupping his tear-stained cheek with her palm. It's okay, baby, she whispered. Mama needs to say this. Claire rose to her feet. Her legs shook so violently she had to grip the edge of the defendant's bench to steady herself. The pink rubber gloves on her hands, those ridiculous, humiliating gloves she had not been allowed to remove, squeaked against the polished wood. She looked down at Dominic, still kneeling on the floor like a penitent before an altar. And 8 years of buried pain, 8 years of swallowed screams, 8 years of silent tears cried into pillows, so her children would not hear all of it erupted from her chest like a volcano that could no longer be contained. Tell you? Her voice exploded through the courtroom, raw and ragged and absolutely unrestrained. You left me an envelope of cash and disappeared, like I was some prostitute you paid for a good time? Dominic flinched as if she had struck him. I tried to find you, Claire screamed, her whole body shaking now. I called your company every number I could find. Do you know what they told me? Mr. Crane does not accept calls from unauthorized personnel. Unauthorized. Like I was nobody. Like those 3 months meant nothing. The tears were streaming down her face now. But she did not stop. She could not stop. The dam had broken, and the flood would not be held back. I gave birth alone, Dominic. Alone in a public hospital charity ward because I couldn't afford anything else. I almost died on that table hemorrhaging for 6 hours while doctors who didn't even know my name tried to save me. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. And when I woke up, I had 2 tiny babies, and no one to help me. Victoria shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. She's clearly lying to manipulate silence. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like thunder. His face had gone pale, his earlier frustration replaced by something that looked almost like horror. One more word, Miss Ashford, and I will hold you in contempt. The witness. He caught himself. The defendant may continue. Claire laughed bitterly, a broken sound that held no humor. I worked 18 hours a day, she continued, her voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. Cleaning toilets, scrubbing floors, washing dishes until my hands bled. There were weeks, Dominic, when I ate nothing but stale bread so Lucas and Emma could have milk. She held up her ruined hands, the pink gloves somehow making them look even more pathetic. These hands raised your children. These hands kept them alive. These hands held them when they cried for a father who was never there. Her knees buckled. Claire collapsed back onto the bench, all strength drained from her body. Lucas and Emma immediately pressed against her sides, small arms wrapping around her like shields. I never wanted your money, Claire whispered, her eyes finding Dominic's through a veil of tears. I only wanted my children to have a father. Her voice broke completely. And now you're trying to take away the only thing I have left, my freedom. 24 hours before her world collapsed, Claire Bennett stood in the marble foyer of the Crane estate, clutching a mop like a lifeline. The mansion loomed around her like a Gothic cathedral of shadows and secrets. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into darkness above. Stone gargoyles perched on cornices, their blank eyes watching every movement below. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, casting cold light that never seemed to warm the endless corridors. The air smelled of furniture, polish, and old money, and something else. Something that felt like loneliness solidified into architecture. Claire had been working here for 3 weeks now, hired through an agency as a nanny for the 4-year-old daughter of one of Dominic's lieutenants. It was a cover story, a carefully constructed lie. The truth was far more complicated. 3 years ago, Claire had visited a nursing home to see a dying patient, a stranger she had met through a charity program. In the garden of that facility, she had encountered an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench, weeping silently. That woman was Margaret Crane, Maggie Dominic's mother, abandoned in luxury by a son too consumed by his empire to remember she existed. They had become friends, then confidantes. And when Maggie saw Lucas and Emma for the first time, she had recognized those steel-gray eyes immediately. Go to him, Maggie had urged Claire 6 months ago, when Claire's health began to fail. See what my son has become. Decide for yourself if he deserves to know his children before it's too late. So Claire had come, not for money, not for revenge, but to answer a question that haunted her sleepless nights. Was there anything left of the man she had loved? She watched Dominic from the shadows whenever she could. In meetings, he was ice cold, calculating, terrifying. His voice never rose, but grown men trembled at his whispers. She saw him order things that made her stomach turn, heard conversations that confirmed every nightmare she had imagined about his world. But sometimes, late at night, she caught glimpses of something else. Dominic standing alone by a window, staring at nothing. Dominic pausing outside the nursery door, listening to children's laughter with an expression that looked almost like hunger. Dominic sitting in his study with a locked drawer open, holding something she could not see, his shoulders curved with a weight that had nothing to do with business. One night, when the house was silent, Claire had crept into that study. Her hands shook as she picked the simple lock. Inside the drawer, beneath papers and old letters, she found a photograph. Her photograph, the same one from Boston Common. He had kept it. All these years, he had kept it. The discovery had broken something inside her and healed something too. But her body was betraying her. The lupus was progressing faster now. Some mornings, the joint pain was so severe she could barely stand. Fatigue wrapped around her like chains. She hid it all behind smiles and efficiency, but she knew the truth. Time was running out. You there, Nanny? Victoria Ashford's voice sliced through the corridor like a razor. Claire turned, lowering her eyes as she had been trained to do. Victoria stood at the top of the grand staircase, draped in silk and diamonds, her ice blue eyes filled with contempt. People like you should not make eye contact with your betters, Victoria sneered, descending slowly. Remember your place. You are furniture. Furniture does not look. Furniture does not think. Furniture simply serves. Claire said nothing. She had endured worse. But as Victoria swept past her, she paused. Her eyes narrowed, following Claire's gaze toward the study where Dominic had just emerged. And in that moment, Victoria saw something that made her blood run cold. Dominic was looking at the nanny, not through her, at her, with an expression Victoria had never seen him wear not once in their entire engagement. Recognition, longing, pain. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. This woman had to be eliminated. Immediately. Victoria Ashford did not become the fiancée of the most dangerous man in New England by being stupid. She spent the next several hours watching Claire like a hawk circling wounded prey. She noted the way Claire's eyes lingered on Dominic when she thought no one was looking. She observed how Claire's hands trembled slightly whenever he walked past. She catalogued every stolen glance, every barely perceptible intake of breath. This was not the behavior of a simple nanny. This was something far more dangerous. By midnight, Victoria had made her decision. She sat alone in her private dressing room, surrounded by mirrors that reflected her perfect face from every angle. Her fingers drummed against the vanity table as her mind worked through the details. The plan had to be flawless. It had to be irreversible, and it had to happen before Dominic started asking questions she could not answer. Her eyes fell upon the velvet box sitting in her jewelry case. The Crane family heirloom, a necklace of diamonds and sapphires that had belonged to Dominic's grandmother, his mother, and was now promised to her upon their wedding. $2 million of legacy wrapped around her throat at every formal event. A slow smile spread across Victoria's crimson lips. She waited until 3 a.m, when even the night guards grew drowsy at their posts. Then she moved. Victoria crept through the silent corridors in silk slippers, the necklace clutched in her manicured hand. She knew exactly where Claire kept her work bag, a cheap canvas tote left in the servants' changing room near the kitchen. The security cameras in that wing had been malfunctioning for weeks. Victoria had made certain of that. She slipped the necklace into the outer pocket of Claire's bag, burying it beneath a stack of spare diapers and baby wipes. Then she retreated to her room and waited for dawn. The performance began at precisely 9 o'clock. Victoria's scream echoed through the mansion like a banshee's wail. Servants came running, guards drew their weapons, and Dominic himself stormed into her room, his face a mask of cold fury. "The necklace!" Victoria sobbed, pointing at her empty jewelry case with a trembling finger. "Your grandmother's necklace, it's gone, and there's only one person who was in this wing yesterday afternoon." Her accusing finger swung toward Claire, who stood frozen in the doorway with a breakfast tray in her hands. Dominic turned to look at the nanny. His eyes were ice. His jaw was granite. "Search her belongings," he ordered. Claire never had a chance to defend herself. Within minutes, guards had found the necklace in her bag. Within an hour, police had arrived. Within 2 hours, she was being dragged out the front door in handcuffs, still wearing her gray uniform, still wearing her pink rubber gloves. "Please," Claire begged, twisting to look back at the mansion. "Please, let me explain." Her eyes found Dominic's window on the second floor. He was there, silhouetted against the morning light, but he was not looking down at her. He had turned his back. The last thing Claire saw before they shoved her into the police car was Dominic walking away from the window, disappearing into the shadows of his empire. She did not see the 2 small faces pressed against the hydrangea bushes near the front gate. She did not know that Lucas and Emma had followed her to work that morning, worried about their mother's worsening health. But Emma had seen everything. Emma had watched through the window as Victoria crept through the corridors in the dead of night. Emma had seen the blonde woman slip something glittering into their mother's bag. And Emma never forgot anything. The rain began falling over Boston just after sunset, cold and relentless and unforgiving. Lucas and Emma huddled together beneath the hydrangea bushes outside the Crane estate, their thin clothes soaked through within minutes. The massive iron gates loomed above them like prison bars, and beyond those gates, their mother had just been dragged away in handcuffs. Emma buried her face against her brother's shoulder and wept silently. Her small body shook with sobs she refused to let anyone hear. Lucas wrapped his arms around her, his own tears mixing with the rain streaming down his cheeks, but his jaw was set with a determination that belonged to someone far older than 7. "I'll fix this," he whispered into her wet hair. "I promise, Emma, I'll fix this." They could not go home. Home was a 1-room apartment in Roxbury, with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that only worked half the time. Home was where their mother collapsed onto the sagging mattress after 18-hour shifts, too exhausted to eat the dinner she had somehow still managed to prepare for them. Home was where they pretended not to hear her crying in the bathroom late at night, muffling her sobs with a towel so they would not worry. Home was empty now. Mrs. Delgado, the elderly neighbor who watched them when their mother worked late, would be expecting them. But Mrs. Delgado could not help. Mrs. Delgado was 73 years old with a bad hip and no money and no power against the people who had taken their mother away. "Emma." Lucas pulled back, holding his sister by the shoulders. His steel gray eyes, their father's eyes, though he did not know it burned with fierce intensity. "You saw something, didn't you? Through the window." "I saw your face." Emma nodded slowly, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "The blonde lady," she whispered. "The mean one with the red nails. I saw her last night. She was sneaking around when everyone was asleep." Lucas leaned closer. "What did you see?" Emma closed her eyes. Unlike most children her age, Emma remembered everything. Every face, every word, every detail. It was a gift that sometimes felt like a curse. She could not forget the bad things any more than she could forget the good. "She went to the room where Mom keeps her bag," Emma said, her voice growing stronger. "She took something shiny out of her pocket. She put it in Mom's bag. Then she smiled. It was a bad smile." Lucas's hands tightened on her shoulders. "Can you prove it? Can you tell people exactly what you saw?" Emma opened her eyes. The tears had stopped. In their place was something harder. Something that would not break. "I remember everything," she said. "Every single detail. What she was wearing, what time it was, which pocket she used. I remember it all. They spent the night beneath those bushes, shivering and wet but refusing to leave. When dawn broke gray and cold over Boston, they emerged from hiding like two small ghosts. Mrs. Delgado's apartment was 3 miles away. The courthouse was 5. They chose the courthouse. By the time they burst through those heavy wooden doors, their legs ached and their lungs burned, and their clothes were still damp from the night's rain. But they were not too late. Back in the present, Emma stood in the center of the courtroom, her small hand still pointing at Victoria Ashford. The entire room held its breath. "I saw her," Emma declared, her voice ringing clear as a bell through the stunned silence. "I saw her hide the necklace in my mother's bag. I remember everything, every single detail." Before anyone could respond to Emma's declaration, the rear door of the courtroom creaked open. Every head turned toward the sound. Even the security guards froze, their hands hovering uncertainly over their weapons. The heavy oak door swung inward slowly, deliberately, as if being pushed by the weight of history itself. And through that door stepped a ghost. Margaret Crane Maggie entered the courtroom with the measured pace of someone who had long ago stopped hurrying for anyone. Her silver hair was swept back in an elegant bun. Her charcoal wool coat hung loosely on her stooped shoulders. An ivory-handled cane clicked against the marble floor with each step, the rhythm as steady and unstoppable as a heartbeat. She was 73 years old. Her spine was curved by osteoporosis. Her hands trembled slightly with age, but her head was held high, and her eyes, the same steel-gray eyes she had given to her son and her grandchildren, burned with an authority that silenced every whisper in the room. Dominic staggered backward as if he had been struck. "Mother?" The word escaped his lips in a strangled whisper. His face had gone ashen, his composure shattered beyond repair. That's impossible. You're supposed to be locked away in that gilded prison you call a nursing home?" Maggie's voice cut through the air like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Unable to interfere with your life? Too senile to cause trouble?" She did not wait for permission from the judge. She did not acknowledge the guards who stepped hesitantly toward her. She simply walked slowly, painfully, but with absolute determination toward the witness stand. Her path took her past Claire, and she paused. The hardness in her eyes melted for just a moment as she looked at the young woman who had become like a daughter to her over the past 3 years. She reached out one trembling hand and touched Claire's tear-stained cheek. "Brave girl," Maggie whispered. "It's almost over now." Then she turned to face Lucas and Emma. The twins stared up at her with wide eyes. They had met her before, in secret visits to the nursing home, but never like this, never in a room full of strangers, never in broad daylight. "My grandchildren," Maggie said, her voice cracking with emotion she could not quite contain. "Finally, I can see you in the light. Finally, I can acknowledge you in front of the world." Victoria launched herself to her feet, her face contorted with panic. "She's insane!" Victoria shrieked, pointing at Maggie with a shaking finger. "She has dementia. Everyone knows that. Dominic had her committed 5 years ago because she couldn't tell reality from fantasy. Nothing she says can be trusted." Maggie turned slowly to face her son's fiancé. A smile spread across her weathered face, a cold, dangerous smile that reminded everyone in the room exactly whose mother she was. "Dementia," Maggie repeated softly. "How convenient. A diagnosis that appeared right after I refused to bless your engagement. A diagnosis that removed me from my own home just when I started asking uncomfortable questions." She climbed the 3 steps to the witness stand and lowered herself into the chair, her cane resting against her knee. "Let me assure you, Miss Ashford, I am more lucid than anyone in this courtroom. My memory is sharper than yours will ever be. and I have come here today to testify." She reached into the pocket of her coat and withdrew a small black object, a USB drive. "I have evidence," Maggie announced, her voice ringing through the stunned silence. "Evidence that will bury every lie you have ever told." The courtroom had become a theater of revelations, and Maggie Crane commanded the stage. "3 years ago," she began, her voice steady despite her age, "I was sitting alone in the garden of Sunrise Meadows nursing home. It was a Sunday visiting day. Not that anyone ever visited me." Her eyes flickered toward Dominic, who flinched as if the words had physical weight. "I was weeping. I had been weeping every Sunday for 2 years by then. And a young woman sat down beside me on that bench. She did not know who I was. She did not want anything from me. She simply saw an old woman crying alone, and she offered her kindness." Maggie's gaze found Claire, softening with warmth. That woman was Claire Bennett. She had come to visit a dying patient through a charity program, but she stayed to talk to me. She came back the next Sunday, and the next. She brought me homemade soup because she knew I hated the hospital food. She read to me. She held my hand when the loneliness became unbearable. The old woman paused, drawing a shaky breath, and then, one day, she brought her children. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Maggie silenced it with a single raised hand. "The moment I saw those twins, I knew. Those eyes." She pointed at Lucas and Emma. "Those are Crane eyes. My husband had those eyes. My son has those eyes. And now my grandchildren have them too." Dominic made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a groan. He collapsed into the nearest chair, his head falling into his hands. "I asked Claire who the father was," Maggie continued. "She did not want to tell me. She was ashamed not of herself, but of how she had been abandoned. She showed me a photograph, the same photograph you all saw today, and I recognized my own son, smiling in a way I had not seen since before his father poisoned him with this empire of shadows." Maggie's voice hardened. "I helped her, secretly. I arranged for money to be sent through anonymous channels, money from my own accounts that Dominic had not yet managed to seize. I connected her with employment agencies. I watched over her and those children from the prison my son had built for me." She turned to face Dominic directly. He looked up from his hands, his face ravaged with emotions he had spent a decade learning to suppress. 6 months ago, Claire told me she was dying. Lupus. Her kidneys were failing. She needed to know if you were worth trusting with your own children before it was too late." Maggie's voice cracked. "I told her to go to you, to work in your house, to see what kind of man you had become." A tear escaped down her weathered cheek. "I lost you long ago, Dominic. The boy I raised died the day your father dragged him back into this world of blood and money. But I refused to lose my grandchildren too." Dominic's shoulders shook. For the first time in anyone's memory, the most feared man in New England looked utterly broken. Maggie held up the USB drive, her hand steady despite everything. "This contains footage from the mansion's security cameras, footage that my people obtained before it could be deleted." Her steel-gray eyes locked onto Victoria. "It shows exactly who really hid that necklace in Claire's bag." Judge Morrison gestured to the court technician. Within moments, a large screen descended from the ceiling, and the USB drive was inserted into the courtroom's display system. The footage began to play. The timestamp read 3:14 in the morning. The image was grainy but unmistakable. The servants' corridor of the Crane mansion, illuminated by dim emergency lighting. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then a figure appeared. Victoria Ashford glided into frame like a specter in silk pajamas, her platinum blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She moved with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. In her left hand, clutched against her chest, something glittered in the low light. The camera captured everything. Victoria opening the door to the changing room. Victoria locating Claire's canvas tote bag among the servants' belongings. Victoria's red-nailed fingers pulling open the outer pocket. Victoria sliding the diamond and sapphire necklace inside, tucking it beneath a stack of diapers. Victoria's face turning toward the camera for just a moment and smiling. That smile, cold, triumphant, evil. The video ended. The screen went dark. "It's fake!" Victoria screamed, launching herself to her feet. Her carefully constructed composure had shattered completely. Mascara streaked down her cheeks like black tears. Her perfectly styled hair had come undone, wild strands flying around her face. "That's a deepfake. Anyone can create fake videos now. This proves nothing." Judge Morrison slammed his gavel down with thunderous force. "Officers," he commanded, his voice shaking with barely contained fury. "Search Miss Ashford's handbag. Immediately." 2 police officers approached Victoria. She clutched her Hermes Birkin bag against her chest like a shield. backing away until she hit the wooden railing. "You can't do this. I have rights. My father will destroy all of you." The officers did not hesitate. One pried the bag from her grip, while the other restrained her flailing arms. The senior officer laid the bag on the evidence table and began methodically emptying its contents. Lipstick, wallet, phone, keys, compact mirror, nothing. Victoria's breathing steadied slightly. A flicker of hope crossed her face. Then the officer's fingers found the hidden zipper along the bag's inner lining. A secret compartment, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. He reached inside and pulled out a necklace of diamonds and sapphires that caught the courtroom lights like frozen fire. The gallery erupted. Shouts and gasps and exclamations of disbelief filled the air. Judge Morrison pounded his gavel repeatedly, but no one could hear him over the chaos. Victoria's scream was inhuman, a shriek of rage and desperation that echoed off the marble walls. She thrashed against the officers holding her, kicking and clawing like a wild animal caught in a trap. "Let me go. You don't understand. I did it for us, for our future." She was going to ruin everything. Dominic Crane rose slowly from his seat. The room fell silent. Even Victoria stopped struggling, her eyes widening as she watched the man she had planned to marry walk toward her with measured, deliberate steps. He stopped less than a foot away. His face was carved from stone. His steel-gray eyes held no anger, no passion, only a cold, absolute emptiness that was somehow more terrifying than any rage. "The engagement is over," Dominic said, his voice quiet as a grave, "and you will pay for every second of suffering you have caused." He turned his back on her. "Officers, get her out of my sight." Victoria Ashford was dragged from the courtroom like a rabid animal. Her designer heels scraped against the marble floor as two officers hauled her toward the side exit. Her platinum hair hung in wild tangles around her contorted face. The woman who had entered this room as the elegant fiancée of a mafia king left it as a screaming, cursing, broken thing. "You'll regret this, Dominic," she shrieked over her shoulder. "My father will destroy you. He'll burn your entire empire to the ground. You chose a worthless maid over me." The heavy doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off her threats mid-sentence. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. His hands were trembling slightly as he shuffled his papers, struggling to regain some semblance of professional composure after the most chaotic trial of his career. "In light of the evidence presented," he announced, his voice hoarse, "all charges against Claire Bennett are hereby dismissed. The defendant is free to go. This court offers its sincerest apologies for he never finished the sentence." Claire had been standing motionless throughout Victoria's removal, her body rigid as a statue. The adrenaline that had sustained her through hours of terror and revelation had finally run dry. Now, as the words "free to go" reached her ears, something inside her simply gave out. Her face went gray. A violent tremor raced through her limbs. Her lungs seized, refusing to draw breath. The lupus that had been slowly destroying her body for months chose this moment to strike with full force. Claire's knees buckled. Her eyes rolled back. She crumpled toward the floor like a marionette whose strings had been cut. "Mom!" Lucas and Emma screamed in unison, their voices shattering the momentary peace. Dominic moved faster than anyone had ever seen him move. He crossed the distance in 3 strides, his body acting on pure instinct. His arms caught Claire before her head could strike the unforgiving marble. He pulled her against his chest, cradling her limp form with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that had done such terrible things. "Claire! Claire! Stay with me!" Her skin was ice-cold beneath his fingers. Her breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps. Her eyelids fluttered weakly, struggling to stay open. "Dom." Her voice was barely a whisper, a ghost of sound. Don't worry about me." "Someone call an ambulance," Dominic roared, his command echoing through the chamber. Claire's trembling hand found his cheek. Her touch was feather-light, her fingers pale as death against his skin. "Take care of them," she breathed. "Lucas, Emma, they need their father. You're going to be fine," Dominic choked out, his voice cracking. "You hear me? You're going to be fine. I'm not losing you again." A sad smile flickered across Claire's bloodless lips. Her pale green eyes, dimming but still beautiful, locked onto his. "I never stopped," she whispered, her voice fading like a dying candle. 8 years, and I never stopped loving you." Her eyes closed. Her hand fell from his face, and Claire Bennett went limp in the arms of the man who had abandoned her 8 years ago. The intensive care unit of Massachusetts General Hospital hummed with the quiet symphony of machines keeping people alive. Monitors beeped in steady rhythms, Ventilators hissed inside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their harsh, unforgiving glow on the pale green walls. The air smelled of antiseptic, and fear and prayers whispered into the void. In room 412, Claire Bennett lay motionless beneath a thin, white sheet. Tubes snaked from her arms, delivering fluids and medications her failing body could no longer produce on its own. A nasal cannula fed oxygen into her lungs. Electrodes dotted her chest, transmitting the weak but steady signal of her heart to the monitor beside her bed. Her face, usually so full of quiet strength, looked small and fragile against the sterile hospital pillow. The diagnosis had been delivered 3 hours ago by a nephrologist with kind eyes and a grave voice. End-stage renal failure secondary to lupus nephritis. Both kidneys operating at less than 15% capacity. Without an emergency transplant, she had weeks, perhaps days. Dominic Crane sat in the plastic chair beside her bed, utterly still. His $3,000 suit was wrinkled beyond repair. His silk tie hung loose around his neck. His dark hair, usually immaculate, fell across his forehead in disheveled strands. He had not moved from this spot since the ambulance arrived. He had not eaten. He had not slept. He had simply sat here, holding Claire's cold hand in both of his own, staring at her face as if he could will her back to health through sheer force of desperation. In the corner of the room, Lucas and Emma slept on a small sofa meant for visitors. Someone had found them blankets. Someone had brought them sandwiches they barely touched. Now they lay curled together like two puppies seeking warmth, their small bodies rising and falling in exhausted slumber. Dominic looked at them. He studied the curve of Lucas's jaw, his jaw, the way Emma's lips parted slightly in sleep, his mother's trait. The small hands clutching each other even in unconsciousness, hands that had never known a father's touch. 7 years. 7 years of birthdays and first steps and nightmares and scraped knees. 7 years of a life he should have been part of. 7 years stolen by his own cowardice. The door opened softly. Maggie Crane entered, her cane tapping gently against the linoleum. She lowered herself into the chair on the opposite side of Claire's bed, her aged joints protesting the movement. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Dominic's shoulders began to shake. "What have I done with my life, Mother?" His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Tears, the first tears he had shed since his father's funeral 15 years ago, streamed down his hollow cheeks. "What kind of monster have I become?" Maggie reached across the bed and took her son's hand. "The kind of monster who can still choose to be a man," she said quietly. "It is not too late, Dominic." "Not yet." Dominic looked at Claire's peaceful face, then at his children sleeping in the corner, then at his mother's weathered hand holding his. When he spoke again, his voice was steady. "I want to be tested, tonight." He squeezed his mother's fingers. "If my kidney is a match, I'm giving it to her." The test results came back within 48 hours. Dominic Crane was a perfect match, but the surgery could not happen immediately. Claire's body needed time to stabilize. The doctors wanted at least a week to strengthen her enough to survive the transplant. 7 days of waiting, 7 days of uncertainty, 7 days that Dominic spent trying to learn how to be a father to children who wanted nothing to do with him. He brought Lucas and Emma to the Crane estate, their grandmother's insistence, not his presumption. The Gothic mansion that had witnessed so much darkness now housed 2 small flames of life that refused to be extinguished, and they made his life absolute hell. Lucas refused to speak to him. Not a single word. When Dominic asked questions, the boy would stare through him as if he were made of glass. When Dominic tried to help with homework, Lucas would gather his papers and leave the room. The hatred in those steel-gray eyes, his own eyes, cut deeper than any knife ever had. Emma was marginally less hostile, but only because her hostility took different forms. She answered questions with single syllables. She rejected every toy he bought, every treat he offered, every awkward attempt at connection. "We don't need your stuff," she told him flatly on the second day. "Mom gave us everything we needed." Dominic tried anyway. He attempted to cook breakfast and set off 3 smoke alarms. He tried to read them a bedtime story and mispronounced so many words that Lucas actually snorted in contempt before catching himself. He watched YouTube tutorials on how to braid hair and still managed to create something that looked like a bird's nest on Emma's head. "That's terrible," Emma said, examining his work in the mirror. "I know," Dominic admitted, his shoulders sagging. "I'm sorry." She almost smiled. Almost. By the 5th night, Dominic was exhausted in ways that running a criminal empire had never made him. He collapsed into bed at midnight, certain he would sleep until dawn. He was wrong. A scream pierced the darkness at 2 a.m. Dominic was on his feet before his eyes fully opened, his body moving on pure instinct toward the sound. He burst through the door of the children's room to find Emma thrashing in her bed, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, crying out for someone who was not there. "Mom! Mommy! Don't go! Please don't leave us!" Lucas sat frozen in his own bed, watching his sister with helpless anguish. Dominic did not think. He simply acted. He crossed the room and gathered Emma into his arms, blankets and all. She fought at first, small fists striking his chest, but he held her firmly, gently, the way he had seen parents hold their children in movies and memories of his own mother. "Shh," he murmured against her hair. "I'm here. You're safe. I'm not going anywhere." Slowly, gradually, her struggles subsided. Her sobs quieted to whimpers, then to soft hiccups, then to steady breathing. Her fingers, which had been pushing against him, curled into the fabric of his shirt and held on. Dominic sat on the edge of her bed, rocking her gently, for the rest of the night. Just before dawn, Emma mumbled something into his chest. Her voice was thick with sleep, hovering in that space between dreaming and waking. "Daddy, don't go." Dominic's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same moment. "Never," he whispered back. "Never again." In the doorway, unseen by either of them, Lucas stood watching. His small hands gripped the doorframe. His jaw was clenched tight, but his eyes, those hard, angry, wounded eyes, had begun to soften. Claire woke on the 6th day. Her eyes fluttered open to find the sterile white ceiling of the ICU above her, the steady beeping of monitors around her, and Dominic Crane asleep in the chair beside her bed. His hand was wrapped around hers, his grip loose but persistent even in unconsciousness. She tried to pull away. The movement woke him instantly. His steel-gray eyes snapped open, alert and searching, before softening with relief when he saw her looking back at him. Claire. Her name escaped his lips like a prayer. "Thank God." The doctors said, "Where are my children?" Her voice was a rasp, weak from days of disuse. "They're safe. They're with my mother at the house. I can bring them. I don't want anything from you." The words hit him like stones, but he did not flinch. He had expected this. He deserved this. "Claire, please listen. No." She tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her. She collapsed back against the pillows, tears of frustration and exhaustion leaking from the corners of her eyes. "I heard the nurses talking. I know what you're planning, and the answer is no. I won't take your kidney. I won't take anything from you ever again." Dominic rose from the chair and did something he had not done for anyone in over a decade. He knelt. The most powerful man in New England lowered himself to his knees beside her hospital bed, his eyes level with hers, his pride abandoned on the cold linoleum floor. "You're not taking it for me," he said quietly. "You're taking it for Lucas and Emma. They need their mother, Claire. They have already lost so much. Don't make them lose you too." Claire turned her face away, but she could not stop the sob that escaped her chest. "You don't get to do this," she whispered brokenly. "You don't get to disappear for 8 years and then save my life like some kind of hero. That's not how this works. I know." His voice cracked. "I know I don't deserve to save you. I don't deserve to breathe the same air as you. But please, please let me try to make one thing right." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the rhythm of machines and the weight of years. Finally, Claire spoke again. "Why?" She turned back to face him, her pale green eyes swimming with tears. "Why did you leave like that? Without a word? Without even giving me a chance?" Dominic closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "My father found me. The night I disappeared, his men dragged me back. He told me." His voice faltered. "He told me that if I ever contacted you again, he would have you killed. He showed me photographs of you, of your apartment, of your daily routine. He said you would die slowly, and I would be forced to watch." Claire's breath caught. "I thought silence was protection," Dominic continued, his words tumbling out like a confession. "I thought if I stayed away, you would be safe. I was an idiot, a coward. I convinced myself that leaving you was the noble thing to do, when really I was just too weak to fight for us." He reached for her hand. This time, she did not pull away. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he whispered. "I just want the chance to try, to be the man I should have been, to be the father our children deserve." Claire studied his face for a long moment, the lines that had not been there 8 years ago, the silver at his temples, the scar she did not recognize, the tears she had never imagined he could shed. "I haven't forgiven you," she said finally. "I don't know if I ever can." But her fingers curled around his. "But I'm willing to let you try." The morning of the transplant dawned gray and cold over Boston. Dominic and Claire were wheeled into adjacent operating rooms at precisely 7 o'clock. Before the doors separated them, Dominic reached across the gap between their gurneys and squeezed Claire's hand. "See you on the other side," he said softly. Claire managed a weak smile. "Don't die on me, Dominic Crane. Your children still need to yell at you some more." Then the doors swung shut, and they were apart. In the surgical waiting area on the 3rd floor, 3 people settled in for the longest day of their lives. Maggie Crane sat in a cushioned chair by the window, her ivory cane resting against her knee, her rosary beads moving silently through her weathered fingers. She had not prayed this earnestly since the day her husband died. Today, she prayed for both her son and the woman who might yet save him from himself. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by crayons and paper that a kind nurse had brought her. She drew with fierce concentration, her small tongue poking out from the corner of her mouth the way it always did when she was focused. Lucas sat rigid in a plastic chair, staring at the operating room doors as if he could see through them by sheer force of will. The 1st hour passed, then the 2nd, then the 3rd. Nurses came and went with updates that said nothing. "The procedure is ongoing. Both patients are stable. The surgeon will speak with you when it's finished." By the 4th hour, Lucas's leg had begun to bounce uncontrollably. By the 5th, he had chewed his fingernails down to the quick. Emma looked up from her drawing and watched her brother with worried eyes. She had never seen him this scared, not even during the worst nights in their tiny apartment, not even when Mom collapsed at the courthouse. "Lucas?" she said quietly. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on those doors. Then, slowly, he slid off his chair and onto his knees. Emma's breath caught. In 7 years of life, she had never once seen her brother pray. Their mother had taught them about God, had taken them to church when she could afford the bus fare, but Lucas had always sat through services with his arms crossed and his jaw set. Now he knelt on the cold hospital floor, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white, his eyes squeezed shut. "Please," he whispered, so softly that only Emma could hear. "Please let them be okay. Both of them. I'll stop being angry. I'll give him a chance. Just please, please don't take them away." Maggie's rosary paused. Tears slipped silently down her weathered cheeks as she watched her grandson pray for the first time. Emma set down her crayons and crawled over to her brother. She wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. The 6th hour began. The operating room light above the doors still glowed red. Then, at exactly 1:17 in the afternoon, the light went dark. The doors swung open. "Doctor?" Catherine Walsh emerged, still wearing her surgical cap, exhaustion carved into every line of her face, but she was smiling. "The surgery was successful," she announced. "Both patients are stable. The kidney is functioning beautifully." Maggie's rosary fell from her fingers as she pressed both hands to her mouth. Lucas let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Emma burst into tears of pure relief. "Can we see them?" Lucas demanded, already on his feet. Dr. Walsh nodded. "They're in recovery. They're both still groggy from anesthesia, but yes, you can see them." Lucas ran. He sprinted down the corridor, ignoring the nurse who called after him to slow down, ignoring everything except the desperate need to see with his own eyes that his parents were alive. He burst through the recovery room door and stopped dead. 2 hospital beds sat side by side, so close they were almost touching. In one lay Claire, pale but breathing steadily. In the other lay Dominic, an IV dripping into his arm, his face drawn with the aftermath of surgery. And between them, reaching across the narrow gap, their hands were intertwined. Even unconscious, they had found each other. 2 months passed like a slow awakening from a long nightmare. Claire's body accepted Dominic's kidney as if it had always belonged to her. The organ functioned beautifully, filtering her blood with an efficiency her own kidneys had not managed in years. Color returned to her cheeks. Strength seeped back into her limbs. The lupus remained, but without the constant strain of failing kidneys, it quieted to a manageable whisper. Dominic was there every single day. He arrived at the hospital each morning before the nurses finished their rounds. He changed her bandages with hands that had once signed death warrants but now trembled with tenderness. He fed her spoonfuls of congee when she was too weak to lift her own arms. He pushed her wheelchair through the hospital gardens when the doctors finally allowed her outside, pointing out flowers whose names he had memorized from a book, just so he would have something to talk about. The man who had commanded an empire of shadows now commanded nothing but a wheelchair and a schedule of medications. His lieutenants noticed his absence. His rivals sensed opportunity. Marcus Webb, his most trusted advisor, handled the emergencies and forwarded only the most critical decisions. Everything else could wait. Dominic Crane had more important work to do. The children watched this transformation with guarded eyes. Emma softened first. She had always been quicker to forgive, quicker to hope. She began asking Dominic questions about the flowers in the garden, about the books on his shelf, about the scar on his face that he never explained. One afternoon, she sat him down in the hospital cafeteria with a serious expression. "Your braids are still terrible," she announced. "I'm going to teach you properly this time." Dominic sat perfectly still while his 7-year-old daughter guided his clumsy fingers through the intricate pattern of a French braid, correcting his mistakes with the patience of a seasoned instructor. When he finally produced something that resembled actual hairstyling, Emma examined it critically. "Better," she admitted. "Not good, but better." It was the closest thing to approval she had ever given him. Lucas took longer. The anger ran deeper in him, the wounds more jagged. But he was watching, always watching. He saw how Dominic never complained about sleeping in an uncomfortable hospital chair. He saw how Dominic held their mother's hand during the painful physical therapy sessions. He saw how Dominic looked at Claire when he thought no one was paying attention. One evening, 3 weeks into the recovery, Lucas found Dominic alone in the hospital chapel. The man was sitting in the front pew, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Lucas did not know what to say, so he simply sat down beside his father, and when Dominic looked up with red-rimmed eyes, Lucas did something he had sworn he would never do. He hugged him. The dam broke. 7 years of anger and abandonment and desperate longing poured out of the small boy as he clung to the father he had never known. Dominic held him back just as fiercely, his tears falling into his son's dark hair. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Meanwhile, Victoria Ashford's trial concluded with a 5-year prison sentence for fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. Her father's influence could not save her. Her beauty could not charm the jury. She would spend the next half-decade in a federal facility, surrounded by women who cared nothing for designer handbags or platinum hair. On the night Claire was finally cleared to leave the hospital, she sat up in her bed and looked at Dominic, who was folding her clothes into a small suitcase. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving me your kidney, walking away from your empire, all of it." Dominic paused. He turned to face her, and his steel-gray eyes held nothing but raw, unguarded truth. "I regret losing 8 years," he said. "Every single day of those 8 years, I will regret until the day I die." He crossed to her bedside and took her hand. "But this? Being here? Watching you heal? Watching our children learn to trust me?" He brought her fingers to his lips. "I would give my other kidney for this. I would give everything I have." The black SUV pulled through the iron gates of the Crane estate on a brilliant October afternoon, and Claire barely recognized the place. Gone were the heavy velvet drapes that had shrouded every window in perpetual twilight. In their place hung sheer white curtains that billowed gently in the autumn breeze, allowing golden sunlight to flood the rooms for the first time in decades. The stone gargoyles still perched on their cornices, but someone had hung small flower baskets from their outstretched claws, transforming them from guardians of darkness into whimsical garden ornaments. "What happened here?" Claire whispered, her pale green eyes wide with disbelief. Dominic helped her out of the car, his hand steady on her elbow. "I made some changes." That was an understatement. Fresh flowers bloomed in every room, roses and lilies and sunflowers that Emma had chosen from a catalog. The cold marble floors were now softened by colorful rugs. Family photographs lined the hallways, not the stern portraits of dead Crane ancestors, but pictures of Lucas and Emma that Maggie had secretly collected over the years. The children's rooms had been completely transformed. Lucas's space was now a haven of deep blues and greens, with bookshelves stuffed with adventure novels and a telescope pointed toward the window for stargazing. Emma's room burst with soft purples and fairy lights, a canopy bed draped in tulle, and an entire corner dedicated to art supplies. "How did you know?" Emma breathed, spinning in circles to take it all in. "Your grandmother helped," Dominic admitted. "She's been paying attention for a lot longer than I have." As if summoned by her name, Maggie appeared at the top of the grand staircase. But she was not descending from a guest room. She was emerging from the master suite on the east wing, the rooms that had belonged to her before Dominic's father had banished her to a nursing home. "Welcome home, my dears," she said, her weathered face glowing with joy. "I hope you don't mind, I've decided to move back in. Someone needs to keep this household running properly." Claire laughed. It was a small sound at first, rusty from disuse, but it grew and bubbled and filled the foyer like music. Dominic stared at her as if she had just performed a miracle. In all their time together, both 8 years ago and in the weeks since the trial, he had never heard her truly laugh. "I don't mind at all," Claire managed between giggles. "This house needs a matriarch." That evening, they gathered around the dining room table for their first meal as a family. Not in the formal dining hall with its 60-foot ceilings and intimidating portraits, But in the small breakfast room that overlooked the garden, Maggie had insisted on cooking herself a simple roast chicken with vegetables. Nothing elaborate. Lucas complained that the carrots were mushy. Emma accidentally knocked over her water glass. Dominic told a terrible joke that made everyone groan. It was chaotic and imperfect and absolutely wonderful. Claire looked around the table at the faces illuminated by candlelight, her children, finally safe, her unexpected mother-in-law, finally free, and the man who had broken her heart and was now slowly piecing it back together. She smiled, a real smile, the first one in years that reached all the way to her eyes. That night, after the children were tucked into their new beds and Maggie had retired to her suite, Dominic walked Claire to her room. He did not presume to enter. He simply stood in the doorway, watching her settle onto the edge of the bed. "Good night, Claire," he said softly. "Good night, Dominic." He turned to leave, then paused. Without looking back, he spoke into the darkness of the hallway. "I'll be here when you wake up, and every day after that, for as long as you'll let me." The door closed gently behind him, and for the first time in 8 years, Claire fell asleep without fear. 3 months unfolded like the slow turning of pages in a story being rewritten. The Crane estate, once a mausoleum of shadows and secrets, transformed into something it had never been before, a home. Laughter echoed through hallways that had known only whispered conspiracies. Children's footsteps thundered up staircases that had witnessed only measured, fearful treads. The smell of fresh-baked cookies replaced the scent of cigar smoke and old money. Dominic learned to be a father one clumsy step at a time. Every morning at 7 o'clock sharp, he stood in the kitchen making breakfast. The pancakes were rarely round. The eggs were sometimes rubbery. But he was there, wearing an apron that Emma had decorated with glitter glue, flipping and frying with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. He drove the children to school himself, refusing to delegate the task to any of his staff. The black SUV that had once ferried him to clandestine meetings now navigated school zones and carpool lanes. He learned which teachers Lucas liked and which ones Emma complained about. He memorized the schedule of soccer practices and art club meetings and parent-teacher conferences. Homework became their evening ritual. Dominic discovered that he had completely forgotten long division and had to relearn it alongside Lucas. Emma's creative writing assignments left him simultaneously proud and bewildered. Her imagination knew no boundaries, and her spelling was creatively catastrophic. "That's not how you spell dinosaur," he pointed out one evening. "It's how I spell it," Emma replied with perfect confidence. He let it go. Claire healed in ways that went beyond the physical. As her strength returned, so did her sense of purpose. She began volunteering at a shelter for single mothers in Roxbury, the same neighborhood where she had struggled alone for so many years. She organized donation drives. She held hands with women who were walking the path she knew too well. She became living proof that survival was possible. "You're giving them hope," Maggie told her one afternoon, watching Claire pack boxes of supplies. "That's worth more than money." The children's walls continued to crumble, brick by brick. It happened on a Tuesday morning, completely without warning. Lucas was rushing to gather his backpack for school, and Dominic was holding out his forgotten lunch bag. "Thanks, Dad," Lucas said automatically, grabbing the bag and sprinting for the door. He froze 3 steps later, realizing what he had said. Dominic froze too, the word echoing in his ears like a bell. Lucas turned slowly. Father and son stared at each other across the foyer. Then Lucas shrugged, a tiny smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Whatever. Don't let it go to your head." He ran out the door. Dominic stood motionless for a full minute, tears streaming down his face. Emma followed her brother's lead 2 days later, announcing at dinner that Dad's pancakes are actually getting edible. She said it casually, as if she had been calling him that all her life. Maggie watched it all from her favorite chair by the window, her rosary in her hands, her heart overflowing with gratitude. And slowly, carefully, Dominic and Claire began to date again. He took her to the small Italian restaurant where they had shared their first meal 8 years ago. He brought her flowers, not expensive arrangements delivered by assistants, but simple bouquets he picked out himself, often mismatched and slightly wilted. They walked through Boston Common, holding hands like teenagers, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, as they sat on their old bench watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Dominic turned to her. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked quietly. Claire looked at him, at the silver in his hair, at the lines around his eyes, at the scar she now knew the story behind, at the man who had broken her and was now rebuilding her with every breath he took. "I believe in us," she answered. 6 months after the trial that had nearly destroyed them, the Crane family returned to Boston Common. The October air was crisp and golden, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and cinnamon from a nearby vendor's cart. Families picnicked on the grass. Children chased squirrels between the ancient oak trees. Street musicians played jazz on distant corners, their melodies drifting like memories through the park. Dominic led them along the winding paths, his hand intertwined with Claire's, the children running ahead with Maggie, shuffling contentedly behind. He had told them it was a simple family outing, a celebration of how far they had come. Only Maggie knew the truth. "There," Emma shouted, pointing toward a wooden bench beneath a massive maple tree. "That's the bench from the old photograph, isn't it?" Claire stopped walking. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the spot, the exact spot where she and Dominic had posed 8 years ago, young and hopeful and blissfully unaware of the heartbreak that awaited them. "How did you remember?" she whispered. "I never forgot," Dominic replied softly. "Not a single detail, not a single moment." He guided her toward the bench, and she sat down slowly, her pale green eyes glistening with unshed tears. The children gathered close, unusually quiet, sensing that something important was about to happen. Dominic took a deep breath. Then he lowered himself to one knee. Claire's hands flew to her mouth. Behind her, Lucas and Emma grabbed each other's arms, vibrating with barely contained excitement. Maggie dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "Claire Bennett," Dominic began, his voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions raging inside him. 8 years ago, I was too much of a coward to fight for you. I let fear and duty and my father's threats steal the best thing that ever happened to me. I abandoned you when you needed me most. I missed the birth of our children. I missed their first steps, their first words, their first everything." His steel-gray eyes, usually so guarded, were completely open now, vulnerable in a way that the most powerful men in New England would never believe possible. "I am not worthy of you. I know that. I will never be worthy of you." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "But I am asking, begging for the chance to spend the rest of my life trying." He opened the box. Inside was not a massive diamond, not a flashy display of wealth. It was a simple silver band holding a small oval stone of the palest green, the exact shade of Claire's eyes. "This isn't about money or status or making up for lost time," Dominic continued. "This is about waking up next to you every morning. This is about burning pancakes and helping with homework and growing old together. This is about being a family, a real family for whatever years we have left." He looked up at her, his heart laid bare. "Claire, will you marry me?" The tears spilled down her cheeks freely now. She looked at the ring, at the man kneeling before her, at the children bouncing on their toes behind her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, laughing through her tears. "Yes, you impossible man. Yes." Lucas and Emma erupted into cheers, throwing themselves at their parents in a chaotic group embrace. Maggie wept openly, praising every saint she could name. Nearby, strangers broke into spontaneous applause. Dominic slipped the ring onto Claire's finger with trembling hands. It fit perfectly. "But," Claire added, pulling back to look him in the eye with mock sternness, "you have to learn to cook properly. I refuse to spend the rest of my life eating burnt pancakes." Dominic laughed, a real laugh, full and warm and free. "Deal." A passing tourist offered to take their photograph. The four of them arranged themselves on the old wooden bench, the same angle, the same park. But everything else had changed. When the camera clicked, it captured not two young lovers full of naive hope, but a family forged through fire. A father who had learned humility, a mother who had found strength, 2 children who had discovered that even broken things could be made whole. The photograph would hang in the Crane estate for generations to come. The wedding took place on a perfect spring afternoon in the garden of the Crane estate. No grand cathedral, no 500 guests, no extravagant displays of wealth. Just family and a handful of close friends gathered beneath an arch of white roses, with the Boston skyline glittering in the distance. Claire walked down the grassy aisle in a simple white dress that flowed like water around her ankles. No designer label, no diamond tiara, just fresh flowers woven through her chestnut hair and the pale green ring already glinting on her finger. She had never looked more beautiful. Dominic waited at the altar in a navy blue suit, not black, never black again. The color of new beginnings, the color of the ocean where they had once dreamed of sailing away together. His steel-gray eyes never left her face as she approached. Lucas stood solemnly beside his father, clutching the wedding bands on a small velvet pillow. He had practiced this responsibility for weeks, terrified of dropping them at the crucial moment. Emma danced ahead of her mother, scattering rose petals with gleeful abandon, occasionally throwing handfuls directly at guests who pretended to be outraged. Maggie sat in the front row, tears streaming freely down her weathered cheeks, her rosary clasped between her fingers. She had prayed for this day. She had fought for this day. And now, watching her son marry the woman who had saved him from himself, she finally understood that miracles were real. The vows were simple. "I promise to be here," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every morning when you wake, every night when you sleep, every moment in between, I will be here. Not because I deserve you, I never will, but because loving you is the only thing I have ever done right." Claire smiled through her tears. "I promise to let you try," she replied, "to trust you with my heart again, to build something beautiful from the ashes of what we lost. I promise to believe in second chances because you taught me they exist." They exchanged rings. They shared a kiss, and just like that, they were married. The reception spilled across the garden as afternoon melted into evening. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees. Music drifted from a small band. Guests laughed and danced and toasted the impossible love story they had all witnessed. Later, as the stars emerged above the mansion, Claire and Dominic stood alone by the great fireplace in the living room. Above the mantel hung 2 photographs side by side, the old one, worn and creased, showing 2 young lovers in Boston Common, and the new one, showing a family of 4 on that same bench, whole and healed and happy. "We made it," Claire whispered, leaning into her husband's embrace. "We did," Dominic agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. Against all odds, the moment was broken by thundering footsteps and delighted shrieks. "Mom! Dad!" Lucas and Emma burst into the room, each grabbing a parent's hand. "You have to come cut the cake. Grandma says she'll eat it all herself if you don't hurry." Claire laughed that beautiful, musical laugh that Dominic would never tire of hearing. "Well," she said, squeezing her children's fingers, "we certainly can't let that happen." The 4 of them walked back to the garden together, hand in hand, their laughter echoing through the halls of a mansion that had once known only darkness. The Crane estate was no longer a fortress of shadows. It was finally, truly, a home. This story reminds us that forgiveness is not weakness. It is the greatest strength a human heart can possess. It teaches us that love, true love, can survive betrayal and time, and seemingly insurmountable obstacles. It shows us that family is not defined by blood alone, but by the choices we make every single day to show up for the people who need us. No matter how lost we become, no matter how many mistakes we make, redemption is always possible if we are willing to fight for it. What did you feel while listening to this story? Have you ever experienced a second chance in your own life? We would love to hear your thoughts and reflections from deep within your heart. Please share your comments below. If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. We bring you inspiring stories every day, and your support helps us continue this journey together. Thank you for being here with us today. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.